Here's a real quick video for you guys. So I posted the longest video I've ever posted on YouTube, 16-minute video the other day about knife fighting. I went over angles of attack and over all this stuff. And of course, being that it's 16 minutes, it has way less views than anything else. But somebody did ask about it, and this was a good question, so I thought I'd post a quick response since I can. In class, I always talk about keeping your knife movements very small, but on the video, I was making these big motions. So I was going over things, and we were going over the drills like angle one, followed by an angle one, all this stuff, and I was doing these big attacks. And somebody they actually tried calling me out on it, more or less. Not even under the video, they emailed me to call me out on it, about my motions being so big. Why? Why are my motions so big when I'm doing this? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Number one, when you teach, when you're an instructor in front of the class, you tend to get in the habit of making your emotions larger and exaggerating them so people can see what you're doing. So very often, instead of doing a 1 and a 2, I'll do a 1 and a 2. And that way people can see my hip motion, they can see the angle, they can see how big everything is. And as opposed to going, okay guys, do a 1 and a 2, and people are looking at what you are, right? Or if I do a snap cut, a flick as we like to call it, and I do a 1 and a 2 as opposed to a 1, 2, and so small. So part of it is just you tend to exaggerate when you're teaching so people can see. That's one thing. The other thing is, I know I was wearing a black shirt, and for some of it I was using a black knife, and I was afraid that if I did everything real small in here, then the black on black wouldn't show up very well, as opposed to like a silver blade on a black shirt. So those are really the reasons that it made the motion so large, was basically so people could see it better. But yeah, in reality, the person was 100% right. You want your motions much smaller if you can. So my instructor before he passed away, Sean McCormick, before he passed away, his knife work was beautiful. I mean, his knife blade never really left an area this big. It was amazingly tight. And ironically, just before I got the message from the individual, I was outside working on a stump in my yard, and I had a blade, and I was going over the stump in my yard, and happened to take notice about how big my blade motion was. And I was kind of kicking myself because it's not as small as my instructor was, right? So instead of being my blade movement within the size of like a dinner plate, mine was kind of within like a dinner platter, okay? And I was doing the part of the drill I was talking to you guys about and some other things, right? And moving, and my blade motion was a little bigger than I wanted. But in reality, yeah, I want to keep it as tight and small as possible because you don't need more than an inch of movement to cut with a blade. Those snap cuts, I want them to be tight and back, as opposed to when I demonstrate them and I'm extending and coming back, or I'm extending and pulling back, and I'm doing these things to generate it. So that's the short answer. Why were my motions so big when I always teach to have them small? Because I was trying to demonstrate and make it bigger to see. Yes, when I actually practice on my own, my motions, I try to get as tight as possible. Here's the other thing that came to my mind, though, when somebody said this to me. When you are practicing at first, especially if you're newer to it, or if, like we said, you're trying to make sure you're doing something right and grading good fundamentals, go ahead and make your motions a little bigger than you normally would. Because believe it or not, gross motor movements, or those bigger motor movements, can help transfer through your brain into what we call muscle memory faster and easier than the small ones. So if you're practicing knife fighting, you feel free to go through those drills and make everything seem a little larger. It's actually going to help you learn them and learn those motions a little better than if you're trying to do it here and looking like a T-Rex, all right? And then what happens is as you get better, make them smaller and smaller. But go ahead and make them pretty large to begin with. It's going to help your body, your brain learn them. And maybe sometime I'll put up a video about what muscle memory really means in that context. But that's the idea. So one, I was demonstrating so my motions were bigger. A, so you could see. B, so you could see it on a black background. And then two, go ahead and make your motions big. Go ahead and make them larger. It's not going to hurt anything at first as you're trying to develop this into your cognitive processing and your quote-unquote muscle memory. All right? So there you go. Quick video. Hope that makes sense.